Professor Stratton.
Professor? Professor?
Oh, can you guys, have I been on mute this whole time?
You have, yeah.
Oh, and you guys have such good stuff. Okay, I was just, let me just repeat for the Zoom. Practice problems 8. I graded them, put them back out here. Today's the last day I'm accepting them. If you guys have them on Zoom, then email them to me if you can, or bring them on Tuesday, I guess. Excuse me, on Zoom, it's harder. And they're looking good. The other thing I was saying is, you're doing the practice problems. If you have the 5th edition print edition, they have the discovering data. And when you get to those, just skip it and go on to the next problem. Yeah, so I'm trying to find an example here. I don't know. They're spread throughout.
Number 13 on
Chapter 8.
Number 62.
Okay. So the problem that I want you to do, let's see, let me confirm this on chapter 8. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the problem I want you to do on chapter 8 is 14. So it's like for this one edition, they threw in these discovering data and moved everything down enough. So yeah, just skip those and do the next one. I mean, if you want to see if you can research these problems on your own, I would love to see that. But the one I want you to do is the next one. So I'm not going to update that on the assignment sheet just because some of you have different editions, and it only seems to be in this one edition that has that problem. So just know if you see that, go to the next problem.
Yeah. If we find it's discovering data and we go next one, can we just reference in the practice problem saying the previous one was discovering data? So in case you're looking at,
That'd be great. Yeah.
if we look,
Yeah.
if you're looking at the, you didn't change it, you said in like
Yeah.
the problems, just to, yeah.
I would prefer that. And I could tell you're an engineer because very detail oriented. Yeah, so that, I'm looking at 60, 70 of these at a time and different editions of the book and trying to keep track of it all. So it can be hard for me to understand what's going on. So the clearer you can make it, but easier for me is to read it. Okay. All right. So is anybody expecting to do a presentation today? Yeah, I don't think we have anybody scheduled today. Okay, good, because we have a lot to do. So this will be good today. How's everyone doing? Yeah.
Slightly on edge.
Yeah, thumbs down, barely. God, it's not just you guys, everyone's on edge, faculty too, but I've met with a couple students this past week and they're like, so, oh, I'm thinking about dropping out. Oh, I'm just so miserable. I'm going to change schools. It's not, I mean, everyone's feeling this. Just hang on there. Just hang on, guys. It's no one at any other school is having a better time than we are here. Everyone, it's just a nightmare everywhere. We'll get through it. I don't know, maybe I should tell you my story a little bit. So I graduated high school in the late 90s and mid 90s. And that was a tech boom. So I just went right into tech and didn't even go to college. So I didn't go to college for about 10 years later, in my mid-20s. And so I know a lot of you are like, well, I'm 22 and the time's getting away from me. You're reflecting on your life, but there's so much time. I had a whole career before I went to college. And then I went to a college that was working for me. I went to a college that had night programs, so I could go to school while I was working full time. And then after I graduated, that school got into a bunch of national trouble. I'm kind of ashamed to talk that I tell people I went there, because after I left, then they got in some trouble with the federal government for some predatory practices. And so I say that because, like, you might be, this, like, it doesn't really matter. Look at me now, right? You have a long life ahead of you. Don't worry about what's happening right now. Just focus on being happy. And then I graduated law school into the worst job market in history for the legal profession, and had a rough couple of years, but now I'm very well off, very powerful lawyer. So I keep telling myself, but no, I mean, I'm doing pretty good. So my life's long. Don't stress about things. Don't start thinking you have to change schools or drop out because COVID makes life so miserable, because everyone's miserable right now. Okay, well, that's my story. Maybe hopefully that helps some of you guys kind of get perspective. Life's long. You have so much time to figure things out. Don't stress right now, and certainly don't stress about economics if this class is causing any stress. Okay, well, with that said, let's get on and talk about long-run economic growth. This is my favorite chapter in the whole book, because this has the most stuff that a lawyer cares about. So we'll get into all this fun stuff about policy and government policies. Okay, so as we talked about Tuesday, quick introduction that we like long-term growth. That's the whole point of macroeconomics. We want long-term growth, we want nice and steady. And because everyone is better off with long-term economic growth. And we can see it mapped here. You can see the United States has had this constant, steady growth. And because of that, we are, as a standard of living, our average person in the United States, because of economic growth, is much, much better than most countries in the world. And in fact, other countries that we see as these growing rich powers, on average, they have less quality of life when judged through the lens of economic growth per capita than us 30, 60, 70 years ago. Okay, so this, again, we're talking about this, we're using this unit of measure of GDP per capita. Why we use that for long-term growth? To understand the impact of long-term growth is because if you look at just the GDP of China versus the GDP of the United States, they're about equal. So does that tell the full story of how that affects the people living in the country? No, because the population of China is 3 to 4 times more than the US. So that same amount of wealth is distributed over more people. So the quality of life on average is lower. So when we look at GDP per capita, we can look at that. We have this growth over time. So using $1,900, we can see from 1900, we have 8 times GDP per capita than our great grandparents did, which can be translated to generally 8 times the wealth and 8 times the quality of life. Right, so this is what the world looks like as far as income. So remember, we're talking about GDP per capita, which is not income, but it's a rough indicator. So we look at incomes throughout the world, and because of this long-term economic growth of the United States, and really think about like history here, there was no United States 250 years ago. There was no westernized countries here, 500 years ago. And in that time, because of our economic growth, we have the highest standard of living, the highest income in the world, compared to countries that have been around thousands of years. And currently, we have low income countries and we have middle income countries. And the differences could be explained by long-term economic growth or the lack of. So the one formula of this chapter is how we figure out how long it will take to double GDP per capita or even GDP. And we can use this mathematical concept, rule of 70, where if we have we know an annual growth rate, we divide 70 by the annual growth rate, and that'll tell us how long it takes to double whatever, GDP per capita, total GDP. Okay. So what causes long-term economic growth? Why is the United States went from nothing literally 250 years ago to the most powerful economy now? What caused all that steady growth? Well, there's three factors that can be summed up with the one word of productivity. We are a productive society. Labor productivity is the output per worker. So we can break that down into three components. The first component is physical capital. What is physical capital? Well, I should give it away there, physical. It's things that are physical. It's buildings, tractors, computers, right? It's things that help a person be more productive. So if you wanted to build a road 100 years ago, you would have to hire 10,000 workers. I mean, some huge amount of workers to dig, right? 10 guys are digging and 10 guys come behind and laying some gravel, whatever, how you build a road. Now, what do? Your whole crew is 10 guys and 6 of them are standing around doing nothing, it seems like, why one guy's in a tractor or in an excavator digging out, right? That's physical capital. That is that tool. Those tools that we use are physical capital. So that makes people more productive. Okay, the second factor of productivity is human capital. What's human capital? It's what you guys are doing. It's education, being smarter, knowing how to do things, building skills. It's the development of the person. So if we use the excavator building a road, right? The physical capital is that tool, the excavator. The human capital is the person that learned the skill, made themselves better learning how to operate that tool. If you put me in an excavator, yeah, I have a physical capital improvement, but there's no human capital improvement. I have no idea how to run it. So productivity is not high. Human capital, though, is not just college. It's not just a trade like running an excavator. It's basic things, learning to read and write. The literacy rate in many countries in this world, especially those poor countries, the literacy rate is very low. We have a very high literacy rate. One of the reasons why China was able to have exponential growth over the last 40 to 50 years is because they improved their literacy rate. So just basic things like being able to read and write, convey information. Think about if we didn't have that human capital element, how low productivity is. If you couldn't read to learn something, you'd have to only learn by watching somebody else. Well, that makes you harder to train people. And it's not just literacy. So that might be it's even more basic than that. Human capital for us productivity also means basic understanding of the world around you. If you think that that a solar eclipse or a moon eclipse means that the gods are angry at you and you're not going to go to work for a week, right? You're not going to be productive. So it gets down to a really fundamental level that we just take for granted in this country because we have basic education. But human capital is anything that's causing a person to be more productive. Okay, and the last part is technological progress. Probably the most common thing we most commonly think of in our generation, your generation, and my generation, because we've seen such progress in technology. But we're not talking just about iPhones and just about tablets and just about laptops. We're also talking about basic things when it comes to technology. We're talking about the printing press. We're talking about books. We're talking about pencils, right? Any kind of thing that's a new technology that can increase productivity falls into this technological progress. Efficiencies are a big part of this technological process. Why did Walmart take over the world? A little bit before your time, but Walmart was the magical story. For a long time in the business world, how did they take over the world? They actually were one of the first people to use technology to increase efficiency and getting their goods from suppliers to warehouses to the retail store. Very mundane, but it created a whole class of billionaires because of that use of technology. Okay, so how do those three factors fit together? Well, we use the aggregate production function. It's a hypothetical function, right? This isn't like this is back to like the social sciences, right? This isn't the function that controls gravity. This is, we made some observations and we kind of applied some numbers until it made sense. But the aggregate production function is how those three elements fit together to have a consistent way of describing increase in productivity. Okay, and this is what that function is. GDP per worker is T, which is technology, times physical capital per worker to the power of 0.4 times human capital per worker to the power of 0.6. It's interesting. So we don't modify technology at all. But then we modify physical capital per worker pretty low, 0.4 to the power of 0.4. And then education is the power of 0.6. So what this implies is if we hold these two constant, technology and human capital, but we increase physical capital, it has a very, very large diminishing of return. So if technology stays the same, so let's use the tractor and the farm. There's no major change in technology. It's still a diesel engine running 4 wheels with some kind of tool on the front to plow. There's no anti-grav power unit innovation or something. It's the same technology. And the worker driving the tractor knows everything there is to know about the tractor. There's no new education that will help. Well, it is the same. How much more improvement does buying the $100,000 tractor over the $20,000 tractor? Maybe the $100,000 tractor is a little bit bigger, or maybe it has air conditioning or cruise control or something to make the driver a little less fatigued for the day. So you'll have some improvement, but you don't have 5 times the improvement for 5 times the cost. So on average, this works out to be holding these two the same. The more money you put that stuff in, the better, the better the tools are. Has a very high decrease in return. So that's what this slide's about. And this is I mean, this should be kind of intuitive. The example used, if you have one computer, if you have no computer, it's pretty hard to do complex math. It's pretty hard to write 1,000 words. With no computer, if you want to write an essay, you have to hand write it out, and then you make a mistake and erase or start over again. With a computer, you dramatically increase your productivity. But what happens if you have a second computer? It doesn't really increase your productivity anymore. Okay, so this is what this looks like mapped out. Productivity function. So down here, physical capital per worker, over here is real GDP. And you can see that as you increase the physical capital per worker, you do have an increase in productivity, in real GDP per worker. But it starts tailing off. The first tractor allows you to plow the field a lot better than walking or than a mule pulling a plow. And the second tractor or the bigger tractor maybe allows you to do a little more. But by the time you get to your third tractor, there's only so much improvement can be seen. So this slide is just kind of summing up what I was just saying. So holding technology and human capital equal, productivity has the least amount of return, as the most diminishing return, only assuming that it's all equal, everything else equal. That diminishing returns is completely changed if you don't hold other things equal. If you train your tractor driver in the latest techniques in handling a tractor using, and then using GPS, which is a technology advancement, so they can really make sure they get every square inch of the field, right? Then you're not limited by that productivity, that physical capital productivity. Then you have this multiplying effect. So what does that look like? That looks like this. So real GDP per worker, physical capital per worker. So this line is productivity using 1945 technology. So at each point of adding physical capital, you end up having this. Excuse me. But then we don't hold technology the same equal anymore. We say we're going to have improvements in technology, so we use modern technology, and we see that for each increase in physical capital, we have a more dramatic increase in productivity because we have this multiplication effect with technology. So without technology, we would go from A to C as productivity. But with technology, we go from A to D. Right? Again, this should make sense. It should be pretty intuitive. If you're using the nicest computer from 1980, it's just not going to be as productive as the nicest computer today because there's been so much technology innovation. Okay, so how do we know what's affecting this? Well, they use growth accounting, economists, growth accounting. It estimates the contribution of each major factor in the aggregate production function, right, to economic growth. And this definition of total factor productivity is just that outcome. The factors being physical, human capital and technology, total factors, the final output when combining all of those. Okay, so this is the secret. This is the United States secret. This is what South Korea's secret is also based on. Technology is the big thing here. So total factor of productivity, that increasing total productivity is most heavily influenced by technology, which we already kind of saw that indicated with this formula before, where we didn't modify technology. Right? We modify physical capital and human capital, but technology is not reduced. So technological changes are one of the biggest impacts to increase in productivity. Okay, so I think it would be pretty weird if the book didn't talk about natural resources. You wouldn't have heard about this in this way 30 years ago taking an economics class, but we now understand how we're ruining the planet, which we'll get a little bit more into. But for now, let's just talk about natural resources as a matter of productivity. So the US expanded really quickly because we have this huge landmass, untouched, forests, minerals, water. So we went manifest destiny, went west, and we just started consuming all these natural resources. At the time, the technology of the world required the use of natural resources for any kind of productivity growth, right? So you needed to chop down wood, you needed to dig up coal, for energy, right? So the use and the availability of natural resources was the biggest indicator of productivity. So much so that it was theorized 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, that economic growth could only be the result of the use of natural resources, and that any country that ran out of natural resources or ran low would have economic decline. We know that's not true. For one thing, Japan is a powerhouse economy, and they have almost no natural resources on their island. Okay, so the book kind of introduces natural resources and talks about it again, so maybe we should do that too. So let's talk about this. I don't know if anybody selected it for their presentation, but the rise and fall of productivity paradox is kind of interesting because it's this whole line of study about technology and how it actually leads to productivity, meaning that there are some that argue that the space from World War II to the end of the last century was all the technology progress we've made. We haven't made any technology progress since, and maybe all the technology progress we'll ever make ever again. We made so much progress in that time. There's nothing new to learn. And so if that's the case, then what's been happening since? How is productivity increasing? So I mean, just to expand a little bit on that. So everything that you think of as progress in the last 20 years actually traces its root to an invention in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So your iPhone, all the technology in your iPhone that came out in 2007 was actually technology invented in the 70s. That's just been refined since then. So how do you account for increase productivity if there's been no new real invention, no new real progress in 20 years? Well, that's this theory that progress happens and it produces almost no productivity gains, or very little, or maybe even negative productivity gains, until some time passes and people figure out how to use that technology for actual productivity gains. So the personal computer came out in the 80s. People started using spreadsheets, but it wasn't really any faster than the older ways of doing it. But it took until 20 years later for people to really understand how to use electronics, computers, to really see that productivity gain, to be more efficient with it. So does it take time for innovation to show up in the productivity data? You can see here these times of huge gains. So 48 to 73, huge productivity gains, and it slows down. And then there's a new wave of innovation, and then it slows down. Now, I don't believe in that theory that all innovation that will happen in our lifetimes happen in this time period. There actually is a good argument. If you look at the data, a lot of stuff traces itself back to innovation here. However, how innovation works is a lot of the stuff that's happening now isn't like well known or understood. And we're seeing tremendous innovation in the medical world with technology that didn't exist 50 years ago, that we won't really understand it until the next decade. Okay, so why do growth rates differ? Why is the United States steadily at 3% year after year after year, while China was at 8%, but before that it was at very low? Why does Argentina never grow? Well, one of those reasons is savings and investment spending. So we get more into this after spring break, what this means, but savings and investment spending is what you do with your money when you're not spending it. So there's only two things you can do with, there's three things. You could put your money in your mattress, under your mattress, and not do anything with it. But that's pretty rare. Typically you get your paycheck and you spend it, or you put it in the bank. What does the bank do with it? Well, they do something. They don't just sit on it. That's how banks work. So they invest. If you take your money and buy stock, that's a form of investing. What other? I'm sure there's other scenarios that you guys would have exposure to. But essentially, if you're not spending money, then it's being invested somehow. So the amount of savings in a country also equates to the amount that the country is investing in itself. So countries with high savings rates have high investment, at least the long-term gains. Education, we already talked a little bit about this. If you can't read and write, you can't convey information easily. If you don't have education, then you get spooked because the moon doesn't come out this time, so the demons are going to get you, right? There's all sorts of reasons why education leads to societies that function better. And lack of education leads to people not working or working at most efficiently. We also have research and development. This is the American thing. In the United States, we pioneered research and development as a business concept. That you should, as your business, put so much of your money back into improving and researching and improving applied development. Right? So not just random research, it's I need to sell a better product, so let's figure out how to make the product better and more efficient. I don't know why this slide is here, but this slide's getting back to education, right? Education is human capital on the productivity factors. So we can see China's rise also correlates. So China's rise in GDP started happening around here, and it correlates pretty closely to the rise in literacy. Very low literacy rate, very high literacy rate. Argentina, though, oddly, had a high literacy rate, but they don't have a lot of growth. So how does the government promote long-term growth? Infrastructure. Well, we pay taxes. No one will build a road, but the government can say, I can build a road. So the government builds a road so that the companies can get their goods around to you, to the store, so you can get to work. Ports, power lines, information networks. All right, government subsidized education. They used to more. They used to subsidize higher education. They still do, but not directly. Current government subsidies to higher education are student loan backings. Most of us would not be in college if it wasn't for student loans. And we wouldn't get student loans if the government didn't back them. Okay? Most of us wouldn't, no bank would have given most of us $100,000 loan at 18 without a job, without the government subsidy. The government also subsidizes R&D, and it subsidizes it as a way of through education and as direct research and development. So through education, many of the grants given to professors at universities for research, which funds universities, are federal. So the government is providing money to higher education so they can exist. And then additionally, the government provides research and development through a couple other different ways. There is government funded peer research. Sometimes you'll watch like a news program like 60 Minutes and they'll like, well, there's so much government waste. For example, the government provided for a study that measured the consistency of ketchup in cold weather. Something like that. Well, why would they do that? Well, that's peer research as opposed to applied research. So applied research is what companies do. I need to figure out a better way to do this thing. Peer research is we just need to learn more. The government funds a lot of that. And then the government also subsidizes research and development through providing contracts. So for example, the government will say, we need a new stealth bomber. Boeing and Lockheed go out and research how to make me a new stealth bomber. And we'll pay you $1 billion to provide something. Okay, maintaining a financial system. So critical. You wouldn't buy things if you didn't have a bank. I mean, you would buy stuff, but you wouldn't buy stuff easily. If you had to carry cash around instead of a debit card, right, you would carry less cash. You buy stuff, it'd be harder to buy stuff. Before debit cards, the government set up a way, the federal banking system, the Federal Reserve is set up to clear checks because nobody wanted to carry all this cash around all the time. So checks came to be. And then how do banks cash checks with one another? How do you cash a check from a different state? This is before, like, telephones. Well, the government got involved and created a system for clearinghouse of checks. The stock market. Wouldn't be any big business without the stock market. So promoting a well-functioning, trustworthy financial system is important. Trustworthy. The government, the US currency is the world's currency because it's trustworthy. Why is it trustworthy? Well, we have a central bank that makes it to help control the value of it, so there's not hyperinflation. We borrow money and we back it up. We have a huge military. So if another country starts messing with our money, we kill them, right? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why our system is good and why you don't want to open a business in Venezuela. Because they don't have a well-regulated financial system. How about protection of property rights? Would you build a factory in this country if the government didn't protect your right to own the land? No, you wouldn't open a business. You wouldn't buy a house. If anybody with a gun can come by and take it from you. What about intellectual property? No one would do R&D and spend $1 billion, come up with the next blockbuster drug if as soon as they came up with it, anybody could just start copying it. We protect intellectual property rights and just general political stability and good governance. Right? You don't open up businesses in places without political stability. If there's a coup every 10 years in the country and there's going to be a new government, new people with guns, you don't open a business there. If you can't predict what's going to happen in the near future, you don't open a business. If there's massive corruption, you don't open a business. Oh, yeah, so this is an interesting one about infrastructure, things we don't think about because we just grew up in a society that has this. Clean water is an example of an infrastructure that's the difference between why the US succeeded and other countries still don't. If you don't have clean water, you're not healthy. You get sick. You don't have good sanitation. Disease spreads. People can't work. So we created a clean water system years and years and years ago at the public's cost. And that allowed us to be healthier. Okay. The book talks a little bit about South Korea, which is one of the only countries in history that went from being a third world, very poverty-stricken country to a first world country in 35 years. How'd they do that? Well, high savings rate. They invested in education and they doubled down on technology. Now, why were they able to do this? Why was this whole area able to do this? Because they were very poor and backwards 100 years ago. And they saw the United States, they saw Russia, they saw the other developed countries making all this progress, and they were able to shortcut it. They were able to say, we don't have to learn how to do this the hard way. We can take the technology these other countries develop and import it. This is what's happening in Africa. For example, if you live in Africa, you probably have better cell phone service and mobile data than you do in this country. Why? Because we developed the technology here. So we've spent billions of dollars building 3G towers. And then we're still paying off those towers when we develop the next generation, 4G, build those towers. They were still paying off those and to build 5G. So there's less money to build 5G. These countries in Africa didn't have the first few generations of cell phone. They're ready to invest in a cell phone infrastructure. They just skipped to the latest thing. So they just built 5G. They're not worrying about paying off the previous infrastructure. Same thing South Korea did. They just started taking what everyone else did and just skipped right to that level. You see this a lot. It's this trouble with Italy. Another one is economics in action, but cultural issues can lead to, especially like in Europe, cultural issues can lead to productivity problems like seniority that reward seniority instead of productivity. So that can lead to some long-term problems. I have a little bit more to get to. Do you guys want to take like a 5-minute break? This is like a 5-minute break. Just stretch your legs or whatnot. And then I'll finish this up. All right, let's get going again. We have a lot to go over, but I'll try to rush through some of it. This whole ALA thing about like the seniority, this is the baby boomer problem, right? So this is a culture that is what everyone hates about baby boomers, right? And just to be very clear, I'm not a baby boomer. My parents are baby boomers. I'm actually right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, or I mean, excuse me, Gen X. I'm kind of in between those two generations. So we all hate baby boomers, right? It's a whole meme about it. Just talking about memes. But the idea here is that people don't like baby boomers because they make lots of money and they hold a bunch of assets and they just kind of suck up all this economic activity. But then you work with them and they're like, well, what do you mean you can't use your phone? Right? What do you mean you don't know how to do this? There's a disconnect between the perceived value by younger generations and the actual value market assigns to them through wages. So that was a cultural problem in Italy that Italy is rewarding with financial rewards seniority versus the most productive, which the argument is the more junior employees have more passion or more knowledge in a technology-based world. So culture, so this is separate from government policy. There's no government policy that says reward seniority. It's a cultural thing. Okay, so long-term growth. What we've been talking about these factors that control long-term economic growth, and we see some examples here: Nigeria, Argentina, and South Korea. So South Korea went from being a very poor country. And they started making this concerted effort, just like China did, for economic growth. So they invested in education, invested in literacy, they invested in technology, and dramatic growth. Why didn't Argentina? Argentina started out high literacy, high education. Well, the book posits that it's corruption, which is a huge problem in South America. There's lots of reasons for it. For one thing, just the culture in South American countries are different in the United States. We're gung-ho. It's that Puritan background we're settled with in this country that if you're not suffering and working hard, you're going to hell. So we have an ethic about working hard. In South American countries, they have an ethic about, we can do it tomorrow. Let's take a nap. So that's part of it. And the other part, a lot of political instability, not always the cause, their fault. The United States does have a way of making sure that the people near us are unstable for our own security. But the idea is that there's political corruption and political instability that causes Argentina to not really have long-term sustainable growth. And then we look at Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in Africa and the world. And they actually are seeing some growth, but what's going on here? Well, political corruption is probably the biggest reason why they remain poor. But the book posits there that there's this theory that it's not political corruption that leads to the poverty. It's the poverty that leads to political corruption. Meaning that because there's so much poverty, so much lack of growth and opportunity, it breeds instability. It breeds corruption, it breeds wars, because everyone's unhappy and poor, and there's no hope. So you can't break out that cycle because you can't break out the poverty. Why can't you break out the poverty? Well, in large part because it's really hot. The soil's not great for growing crops. There isn't this foundational element in the environment to allow for wealth, the natural resource factor. And then also, you know, thousands of years of European colonization didn't help. Yeah, so that's what this slide's saying. Yeah, so this is interesting here. And the book doesn't capture this as a lot because we're using a little bit older book, but sub-Saharan Africa is growing. Nigeria in particular. And not just because there's so many princes wanting to give you money if you just send them money first. You guys get those emails. There's a, what's it, Nairobi? That's the capital of Nigeria. It looks like a modern Western city, skyscrapers, and there's just cranes all over the sky building. There is work here. And a large part of that is China is investing in Africa pretty heavily. Okay, so now here's where this correlation between real GDP per capita and income that we talked about earlier starts failing. While we do see a correlation between increases in real GDP per capita and increases in the average wealth in a country, we can see in our country, it's not been holding steady. We have real GDP per capita going up, but real median income not. Does anybody have any idea why that might be? So first of all, what is it saying to us? It's saying to us GDP is going up. We're becoming a wealthier country, but it's not being distributed. The median is still not increasing. Why is that? Yeah. That is, yes. So that's probably the direct cause. But what causes that? Is it just inequality? It's just the rich get richer, or are there other factors? Well, it is the rich get richer. And more specifically in this country, the more well-educated and the more technology advanced, right, get richer. Because we're in an information and technology-based economy. But also more importantly, income from physical capital, from factories, from investing in like the tools, went overseas to China. So the poor get poorer in large part because those jobs are going to other places. It's called convergence. So what this chart is missing is, yeah, our median income is leveling off, but if you put on Southeast Asia and China and India, you would see, going from really low, start going much higher. So because we're becoming a globalized society, so that wealth gets distributed more easily across the world. All right, so here's convergence theory. So real GDP per capita here, real GDP per capita in 55, right? So we see that growth rate this is real GDP per capita in 1955 and 2015 dollars, and this is the growth rate in that time period. So we see as a convergence, our wealth going down over time, our growth rate going down, excuse me. But you see it's all over the place in the rest of the world, with East Asia picking up most of that benefit. All right. Just to be very clear, East Asia benefit meaning they have extremely high growth rate starting from a very low income in 1955. Where Africa, very low income in 1955 and very low growth rate since, so not much progress. United States, low growth rate, but started off rich. Okay, so then let's talk about the sustainability issue. This is the climate change issue. As we keep pumping out oil out of the ground, we used to say oil was the miracle that enabled the modern world, and we still do say that. It is the miracle that enabled the modern world. Oil, the production of oil used to be the greatest connection, the use of oil to GDP growth. That's why we fight in the Middle East over and over and over again, because there's so much sweet, they call it sweet crude over there. Not just the Middle East has a lot of good oil, the actual quality of oil is good. The oil we get out of our reserves here in this country is dirty and harder to refine. So what is the impact of this? So what we can't tie our economic growth to ruining our environment anymore. We're killing ourselves, we know better, and we're running out of oil and other precious resources. So we need to, as economists and policymakers, need to assess how large are the natural resources left. We used to think we were running out of oil, and then we keep finding new oil, and we keep figuring out how to get the oil that we didn't think we could get before. Technology improvement. That's number two. And how long can we grow in the face of a scarce resource? Can we really expect continued growth this century, knowing that we can't use oil like we used to? Yeah, so this is the graph of the oil problem. So this is U.S. oil price, domestic oil price from 1950 to 2017, right? So what are these spikes here, right? Why did it jump up in 1980? It jumped up in 1980 because the oil producing countries outside the United States, OPEC, decided that they were going to jack up the prices for fun, causing a huge oil shortage. So what did we do? We were relying on that sweet crude oil here. They started messing with us. So then we started finding our own oil, and also we invaded them, to lower prices. And then this instability is because of a large part because we started to think we're running out. But then we learned how to frack, and we learned how to get oil out of oil shale, and learn these other technologies. Okay. Okay, so this is the conclusion that would not have occurred to any economist 100 years ago, but the conclusion we can come to now, we're trying to reconcile now, is resource scarcity and higher prices don't have to necessarily cost growth. We can have growth while not killing our environment and not running out of things. How do we do that? We're still figuring it out. But for one thing, like solar prices for energy generation are like 1/8 of the price they were a decade ago, something dramatic. Right, so now we can produce more through sustainable sources. Okay, and we'll just leave it with this: carbon dioxide emissions in metric tons over the year. So from 80 to 2014, we actually went up, but we started tailing off. So what is that? Why do we do that? We've had traumatic growth since then. Is that a result of better use of resources? Is that a result of better government policies, of cleaner technologies? Or did we just shift all our pollution to China, who's dramatic emissions? I don't know. Probably a combination. Okay. Well, that's all I have for the lecture. Let me get the quiz going here. I guess I didn't put a password in today. Can you guys enter the quiz? Yeah, so no password today.